Good afternoon, everyone. How many of you have children? Put your hand up. Okay, quite a few. Now, how many would like to have children in the future? Okay, so almost everyone in the room either already has children or wants to have children in the future. So imagine one day your daughter comes home from kindergarten with a bag full of second-hand winter clothing. You're a little bit surprised and you don't know really where she got that from, so you ask her. And she explains, well, today at school, a foreign family came to visit, and so all the classes were cancelled so that they could play with the kids and hand out chocolates and second-hand clothing. She didn't know where they were from, but they didn't speak English. But they did take all the kids to the shopping mall and they bought them all ice creams. Now, I think we all agree that that would be pretty weird, right? What I'm here to talk to you about today is how we live in a very weird system and how you can be less weird, and in the process, you can change that system. So, are you weird? Most of you are. Weird is a term from anthropology, actually. It means Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Now, normally this is used to describe people, but what I argue is that it can also be used to think about our system and countries today. We live in a system where weird countries, Western, educated, democratic, have dominated, and through exploitation of non-weird country resources and peoples, now have all the power, most of the money, and all the privilege. Now, I do understand that there are rich people in poor countries, and more every day. And there are also poor people in rich countries, also more and more every day. But in general, the system we live in is one of inequality, and the weird countries have all the power. Let me give you a couple of examples to say what I mean. Does anyone know where most of the refugees are hosted today? In which country or in which region of the world? Anyone? Turkey. Give that man a prize. Most of you will remember in 2015 the mass panic when almost 1 million refugees tried to flee war, famine and terror, and find safety in the EU. There was months and months, and in fact there's still coverage about this issue. But who among you remembers all the media articles and all the issues around almost 3 million refugees residing in Turkey, and how a relatively poor country is going to manage that burden? No, I don't remember those articles either. Now, to be fair, the EU stepped up and they increased funding. They let some refugees in, and there was new funding made available to help those refugees. That's great, right? Well, yeah, except that more than half the money was spent inside Europe to protect the weirdo way of life. Another example that comes from my own organisation here at Blue Dragon. In 2005, we discovered that there was a massive issue of children from central Vietnam in Hue being trafficked to Ho Chi Minh City to work in garment sweatshops. There were hundreds of them, and it was a huge issue. So we decided we needed to do something about it. Unfortunately, at that time, no one else was really interested. Trafficking was all about sex, and this wasn't about sex. Unfortunately, just as we started to get that problem under control, another problem reared its ugly head. And that was the trafficking of women and girls to China. This time it was about sex. They were being trafficked for the sex industry and also for forced marriages to Chinese men who couldn't find wives thanks to the one-child policy. But still, no one was really that interested in it. It was difficult. Vietnam, China, sex trafficking, it's all a bit difficult. Then the media discovered that Vietnamese people were turning up in the UK and were being exploited, working in illegal cannabis farms, in nail bars, and in brothels. Suddenly, trafficking is an issue, and the money started to flow. Unfortunately, the trafficking of people to the UK, those that make it to the UK or to Europe or to most Western countries, is a tiny percentage of the total. The Vietnamese government estimates that of all the people, Vietnamese, who are trafficked outside the borders, across the border, 90% are trafficked to China. The funding currently does not match this pattern. At the moment, there's about $6.5 million going to address illegal migration and trafficking to Western countries, and about $850,000 addressing the trafficking of people to China. So this all looks pretty grim, and it seems like a huge problem. You know, what can I do about a global system of exploitation and dominance? Well, we can do a lot, as it happens. As weirdos, remember, we are the ones that have most of the money, the power, and the privilege. And we're the ones whose voices listen to. Remember that a system is simply a large group of individuals working together to achieve a common goal. Up until now, this goal has been skewed. It's been maintaining privilege and continuing exploitation. It's also been quite invisible to us. We really haven't known much about this goal. But now that we know, and now that we know as weirdos we're in a privileged position, we can do better. If we change the goal, we can change the system. So I have 3 suggestions of ways that we can actually do this as weirdos, just starting from today. Firstly, you need to notice. We need to see who is speaking and who is listening, who is not being heard, and who is quiet. Which issues are being discussed and which issues never make it into the media, or if they do, it's in a very negative way. We need to notice our own thoughts and assumptions about who has the right to speak, about which problems are important, and about who has value and who can solve those problems. In your actions and your assumptions, try asking yourself, would this be acceptable in my country? Or if the roles were reversed, like the kindergarten? If the answer is no, then it's probably weird. We also need to notice good practice. There are, of course, lots of great people out there trying to make a difference and trying to address inequality. We've heard from some of them here today. There are great organisations that are making a difference. Let's try to notice them. Secondly, we need to speak out. As weirdos, remember, we have the loudest voices and we get listened to. So if we don't speak out, then who will? We need to challenge our friends, our family, our workmates when they're being weird. It will be uncomfortable, but as I say, who else is going to do it if we weirdos don't? We also need to help encourage the disempowered and the silent voices to speak out. We need to hear the diversity amongst all countries and all peoples and all types of people. We need to understand more about different ways of knowing, different understandings, how people in non-weird countries actually experience exploitation and the impacts that has on their communities. And we also need to hear their solutions for how to solve those problems. As weirdos, sometimes the best way to speak out is to be quiet. Thirdly, of course, as many people have said to us today, we need to act. We need to find and support those organisations that are doing good work. We need to donate to them, volunteer for them, tell our friends about them, help them apply for the grants. That will mean they can do more work and expand their impact. If you work in development, and I can see some familiar faces here, don't play the donor's game. Don't take the grants that are primarily about encouraging trade with Western countries, or about dealing with problems only as they're experienced in weird countries. Learn about our history. Our countries have many years of history of colonisation and exploitation, and we need to learn that that is the case and the implications of that. We need to try and understand how that exploitation has affected the world we live in today, and what are the ongoing implications? What are the effects of that exploitation? We can't change what country we're born in, but we can try and understand our history and change our futures. Put yourself out of a job. Now that's going to sound really strange, but explicitly or implicitly, most of us are here because of shortages of skills, expertise, or knowledge in the local community. We therefore have a responsibility to share our weirdness, our education, our industrialization, our democracy with local people so that they too can speak up. They can learn from us about how to have the loudest voice, about how to hoard funds and use it for good. And then we will be redundant, and that will be something to celebrate. We can make small actions that will grow to have a big impact. For example, after hearing my talk today, I can pretty much guarantee that none of you are going to visit an orphanage on your next family holiday or book a slum tour. Yeah, did you know that exists? Like, that's a thing, slum tours. But if you show up and don't book that holiday, don't book that slum tour, your friends also won't do it, and their friends won't do it. And before we know it, these sorts of exploitative practices won't exist. So we all have a role to play. We all have a role to play, and we all need to act together because our suffering is mutual and our thriving is mutual. If you show up today, others will also show up. If you show up, if you notice, if you speak up, if you start acting, then others also will show up. And a global movement of weirdos really can change the world. Thank you.